In today's video, we're going to be going through the process of creating a WordPress plugin from scratch. My name is Johnny K, and I'd love to just jump into it. My purpose in showing you how to build a WordPress plugin is because a lot of people recently have been asking me to, add what I'm doing into a plugin so it's easier for them. They don't have to, copy code into their functions, files, or anything like that. So I wanted to show the process that I go through to make a WordPress plugin, and hopefully that's useful for you. If it's not, then there's lots of other tutorials out there. When you have Elementor Pro, you can drag a post widget onto Elementor Pro and it'll showcase all of the different posts that you have in a particular category or for a set of days or things like that. But if you create your query in such a way that there are no posts available to show, then it just doesn't show anything. And sometimes that's kind of jarring, or that leads to just a big empty white space. So if somebody else came up with this issue, and a while ago, I found this issue, and it has a lot of actually really good information in it. Like it says here, I'd love a way to display a message of some kind when the post widget has nothing to show according to the query in place. If you go through and you read, there's a bunch of different ways that people have gone about and solved this particular problem. Some of them are really good, and I actually used these for a minute. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to make it even easier for myself and hopefully for you as well. This actually lives inside of the Elementor page builder. And so you can toggle this show not found content. So there's two different ways that you can do it. You can do simple text, and you can do a saved section. And the saved section is actually really powerful because you can design a whole section using Elementor, save that section, and then whenever there's no post found, you just display that whole section. You don't even have to do anything past there. So anyway, this is the thing that I'm trying to showcase. And so let's actually jump into a WordPress here, and let's see what we are going to be building. Post not found for Elementor Pro. And so I've already installed it and activated it. We're going to go through the process in a minute of how it works, but I want to show what it does to start with. We're opening up this new page, and I've drug in here this edit posts. Jump down to query, and then at the bottom here, show post not found or show not found content. So right now I have this section here that's a save section, 404. Oops, the page or the post you were looking for couldn't be found. This could be anything you want. Let's switch this over to just some simple text, and now it just says no posts found. So you can see that this works really well. Over on the front end, there's that one. And let's go back to showing a saved section, and let's preview that change there. Yep. And so there you go. There were no posts found. Let me show you why there's no posts found. Right now, I only have one post, brand new WordPress installation. I didn't post anything yesterday, so that's why there's no posts found. All right, let's jump into the process of actually building this plugin. What I use to build plugins is Local WP. Local WP is a software that helps you to manage the web server, the PHP version, the MySQL version, and run all of those things together really, really simply so that we don't have to necessarily deal with all of the process of actually installing all of those pieces ourselves. Now, let's jump into what that looks like. So over here is local, and this right now is that WordPress that we're just in. But I want to show you from the beginning. So let's go ahead and stop this one, and we're going to start a new site. So let's create a new site, and we're going to continue. Okay, so that's the name of my site. Yours is going to be something more interesting, yoursite.com or whatever it is. Like I said, this helps us install like PHP, our web server, and MySQL. If there's a reason that you want to come in and actually select these for whatever reason, be specific about it, you're welcome to. I'm going to go for just what's preferred. It works well for me. Okay, so WordPress username. This is the username you're going to use to log into WordPress. There's also a way you can just click a button and it will take you on in. Now we have this site that is getting generated. It's going to ask us for our password. And for those of you wondering, Local does work on Windows as well. I love developing on a Mac because it makes things so easy. You can do this on Windows. There may be a few tweaks. This is the domain name for our site. So I'm just going to select this WP admin here, and it's going to just drop me into WordPress right here. So this is a brand new, fresh installation of WordPress. As you can see, there are no plugins installed. There's nothing happening here yet. Brand new, fresh WordPress for us to hack away at. Okay, let's go back to this. And so how do we get into that? Now, I love to do this, and this seems to work really well. I click on the open site shell, and that opened up my terminal. Another thing that's important here is that it has inserted a couple of local variables into our shell at the moment. And so, for example, Composer is installed here. PHP is available on the terminal, as well as all of this other information. So that's available because we opened it up through our site shell. The next thing I'm going to do is code and a dot. What this does is this opens up our Visual Studio Code at the location where this is installed. So these are all the files for our site. We can do anything we want with these. And specifically right now, what we're going to be doing is jumping over to plugins, and we have this open. Now, I need to get access to a terminal inside this. So you can either click Terminal and New Terminal. Now, that's open up here. And so what let's do, before we do this, I'm going to jump over to the repository that I am going to clone down. This is all the information you need. You can download this exactly as it is if you want. I'm going to go through the process of piece by piece bringing the pieces in so you can understand them individually. So we're going to jump over to our plugins directory. Okay, and we're going to clone down this right here. So we're going to grab all of those pieces. We're going to stick them in a folder here. And then this is going to help me to make sure that I remember all of the pieces that are coming across. So, but what I'd like to do is I want to do this one piece at a time. So I'm going to actually delete everything, and then I'm going to bring them back in as we need them. So let's go here. We're going to delete the includes, delete all of that. Images, sure, we're going to delete all of that. Now, this is the only file we're going to get started with. For a plugin to be valid inside WordPress, it needs this text comment at the beginning of a file. It should be a file that's the same name as the folder that the plugin exists in. It should be. The important part here is that this is what WordPress uses in the dashboard to show some information. So for example, the plugin name, the description, this URI, all of this information, the version information, all of that gets shown over in WordPress. So let's jump over here, and I want to refresh this page and see, yep, here we are. Okay, so even though we deleted everything out of that file, the important part is that the text is still there, that text comment, and all of this information will show up inside of WordPress now. Okay, let's jump back over here and let's explain what this file does. Okay, so one of the things that's really important for WordPress is that we want our plugin to be loaded inside the WordPress context. Now, what that means is that WordPress is going to be loaded and available. There's going to be variables that have already been created, classes that have already been created, and most importantly, we have access to all of the hooks and all of the actions that WordPress makes available. If those aren't available, we don't want our code to run. So what happens here is this is a variable that gets defined by WordPress, and what that does is that allows us to make sure that our file is getting loaded inside of the WordPress context. So we want to put this at the top of all of our important files, or all of our files. The next step here, we have a bunch of constants here that we want to make available to our plugin. So for example, this URL path and the path to our specific plugin, we want to know those locations so that we can either require files, or maybe we have other pieces that need to know where it's located at. The reason that we're doing this here is because we have this WordPress function called plugin dir URL and plugin dir path. What these do is these take the current file, so this is a magic variable for the current file, and it will give us back the plugin dir path. So we want to save that information right now, put it into a constant, and then later on in our plugin, that's going to be available. Now, again, here we're making another constant, but this is a little bit different. This is another function called getFileData. And so what this one actually does is this goes to that text comment that is up here, right? Min PHP version 7.0, and it will return us a value from that text comment so that we can use that later on in our file. That way, in the future, if we have requirements that change, we can make sure they change here in this text file and they'll be updated automatically through the rest of our code. So we have two of those. We want to get this file data for the Min Elementor Pro version and the Min PHP version. So we've defined some plugin constants. Let's move on. Our next step that we're going to be going through is actually, we're going to do our first piece of code that interacts with the rest of WordPress or modifies the rest of WordPress. And what that is we're going to be adding this action. So let's go through and figure out what is an action. Actions are really closely tied with hooks. So hooks and actions you'll hear a lot. So if we jump over to the WordPress Developer Handbook, this is a great kind of definition for what a hook is. Hooks are a way for one piece of code to interact or modify another piece of code at specific predefined spots. They make up the foundation for how plugins and themes interact with WordPress core, but they're also used extensively by the core itself. There are two types of hooks: actions and filters. And so actions allow you to add data or change how WordPress operates. Filters give you the ability to change the data during the execution. So right now we're using this action. So let's go back over that for a second. What we're really saying is, hey, WordPress, when you get to the spot where you are loading, you have the plugins loaded, go ahead and run this function called initialize plugin. And so we've defined that a little bit further on below. Now, to be able to use some of the WordPress pieces that I'm going to be using in just a moment, we need to have included the plugin.php file, and that hasn't been loaded up to this point. So we want to just make sure that that's loaded there. And then we're going to go and let's jump down to our initialize plugin, because that's actually what happens next. This function here has not been called yet. And right here we are with our initialize plugin. What that's going to do is that's going to first off call this function here that says Elementor post not found check requirements. So there's this function up here that's going to return a true or false value of whether or not the requirements have been met to actually load our plugin. And if that returns false, saying that the requirements have not been met, then I actually want to deactivate my plugin. Now, you don't have to do this. You could leave your plugin activated and just put up a prompt and say, hey, such and such an event, wasn't good, and you need to change something. In this instance, my plugin requires Elementor to be loaded, it requires Elementor Pro to be loaded, and it requires Elementor Pro to be at a specific level for the hooks that I'm using. I'm going to go ahead and deactivate my hooks so that there's no other errors later on in the code or somewhere else. This function is going to first off include a file that we're going to be creating in just a moment, or we're going to be bringing back in just a moment, that is the notices that we want to be posting to the WordPress interface saying, hey, WordPress version wasn't up to date, or you need to have Elementor installed. So those notices I've broken out into a separate file. Now you don't have to do this again. You could have all this in the same file. So let's see. Well, first we have here is we're comparing our version of PHP to the Min PHP version that I've listed up here, right here. So if we are less than 7.0, then I'm going to throw an error, and then I'm going to return false saying that I wasn't successful, which is going to deactivate the plugin. So let's go through the rest of these really quickly. This one is every time that a WordPress page is loaded, that's going to show up. And so this is one of those pieces, in the developer handbook, it does talk about making sure that you are playing nicely inside of WordPress. Don't be throwing up messages every time unless there's a good reason to do that, right? Okay, so let's actually just go ahead and delete that out. Now we have, this one is the plugin active. So I'm checking to make sure that Elementor Pro is actually active and the Elementor Pro has the required version. If this check comes back as a true, then this section here is going to get skipped, and we're going to finally and actually include our plugin file right here. Otherwise, we're going to just return, and this file will never be included, and so then nothing is going to happen inside our plugin. So anyway, that's the bootstrap file for my plugin, and so let's go back through and just make sure that we've done everything. Let's go ahead and include this file because it's not used anywhere else. So I'm going to come back over here. we're going to find my admin PHP file and we're going to restore this. And then we're going to just check out what it says. So we've got includes notices, right? Includes notices, PHP admin. We have the admin notice minimum PHP version. And what this is saying is this $1 so that would be after this comma here, Elementor post not found requires $2, which would be PHP, right? Version $3, which is this, which is the 7.0 or greater. Okay, this is what's going to happen if this is called, is that this admin notice is going to show up on the interface. So again, we have the same thing for admin notice wrong Elementor. Admin notice Elementor is missing. So all of those different notices will show up, and so they all are listed here in this file. Okay, so let's jump back down to this. So we've got that one listed here, and now we can include our plugin.php file. So let's jump back over to our repository, and we're going to go over to our plugin.php file. Okay, so let's restore that, and let's go look at it. Let's talk about namespacing for a minute. Namespacing in PHP allows us to have all of our functions and our classes to exist really in their own world. And what that allows for is when we have, say, a class plugin here, other plugins are probably also going to have a class plugin. There's so many different plugins. We just want to make sure that all of our stuff is unique to our namespace. And so this is what I've set up this namespace to be. You're going to want to pick a namespace that works for you. Also, this namespacing allows us to do some more work with Composer. So let's take a minute to talk a little bit about what Composer is. Composer is a package manager for PHP libraries and files and things like that. So what's important though is for this particular plugin is that we're using the Composer's auto load functionality. Now, what does that mean? Right now, when we are getting our files ready to go, we're using this require once, right? So I've done that twice now. There's this require and this require. And we have to know exactly where the file is, and then we need to require it. And then what will happen is in the PHP compiling, then all of the code that exists in this file right here is going to just be inserted into this file and then run, right? And so that's what this require once does. First off, it checks to make sure that it hasn't already been included, but then it'll do that. So when we switch over to auto loading or Composer auto loading, what's going to happen is we are going to do a thing that we call using. So we're going to use a specific file, and then Composer will go through the process of actually figuring out where that file is and then loading it and then making that class available to you. So for example, right here, we're going to be using the class use Elementor post not found admin PNF manager. So post not found manager. But for the time being, actually, I want to comment that out because I want to check to make sure that our plugin is actually running and working before we bring in that component. Okay, next we have that same file that says, hey, if WordPress isn't defined, if we're called specifically, not inside the WordPress context, we're just going to exit. Next, we have our actual class plugin. And so I close that up for a second because what's going to happen is it's going to be statically called with its instance function that exists inside of this. So let's jump into it. We're using the singleton pattern here to make sure that we only have one version of this plugin running at any given time. We're using this here to hold that instance in the future. If you have other pieces that you want to have showing up in your class or your plugin, then you're going to have different variables that you're going to keep track of those classes right here. So for example, I have this plugin manager class that's going to do the work of the post not found stuff. Again, it's not currently active because I haven't reintroduced that file, so I'm going to hide that. Okay, so now we have the clone function. And so what's happening is because we're using the singleton function, we don't want any other methods of creating this class or duplicating this class or anything like that. And so these are two functions, the clone and the wake up are two different functions just saying, hey, if you're trying to use this wake up call on or this clone call on my class, you're doing it wrong. So that's pretty good. Let's keep moving on. All right, so this is that one function. This is our public static function instance that we talked about in the bottom of our file there that's actually calling our function and getting everything running, right? If is null self instance and it starts off as null, then we want the self instance to equal new self, right? And then we are going to return the instance. We're going to return that object out of our plugin. Here is an opportunity for you to allow other people to extend your plugins. Remember, we're talking about action hooks. So this is the place where that action is actually going to be called. And so if anybody has hooked into this particular action, then their code could be called at this point. All right, let's keep moving on. So what happens when we call new self is actually the constructor gets called. And so this right here is our constructor. That is a PHP constructor. And so what will happen is we are going to require the vendor auto load from Composer, and then we're going to add our action. We're going to add a new action that says, hey, when WordPress, when you are in the init phase, then I would like you to call this callback, this init. And so that would be this plugin file and then this file right here. This is actually what's going to set up all of the different components of your plugin. They're all going to be called sequentially right here so that your plugin can finish getting instantiated and all of the different pieces can be created as new. So again, I'm gonna comment this out for a second so that we can see if this plugin is working, and we'll go from there. All right, we need to bring in the vendor auto load PHP. So to do that, I could go through the process of bringing these files back in, but you're not going to have those to start with unless you copy down my file. And if you're changing this much, then you're going to want to just do this way. So remember in the beginning, I said that Composer had been brought in with by opening up VS Code this way. So you should have Composer ready to go. If not, you can check out getcomposer.org and they will go through the process of actually getting Composer installed on your system. It's pretty simple, but there you go. That's how you go through that. All right, so let's jump back over to our code and we're gonna go Composer init, right? So what it's going to say is going to bring you through this generator. It's going to ask you for a vendor and a name. So sure, I'm happy with that for now. Right? The author. So we can add in the author, the minimum stability. And this is going to be a WordPress plugin. And that's actually important if you are actually producing this. You'll want that to be a WordPress plugin so that Composer knows what to do with your file when it is installed. This needs to be GPL v2 or later. If you're making any WordPress plugins, then it really does need to be GPL v2 or later because of the way that the GPL codes licensing is written. You can do compatible licenses. I'm not a lawyer. Go through the process of understanding what's happening there. But if you're making a WordPress plugin, it needs to be GPL v2 or later or compatible license. I'm actually going to say no, I don't want to interactively install or define my dependencies because I don't have any at the moment. And again, same with those. All right, so this is an important piece. Add PSR4 autoload mapping. We definitely want to do this, and our mapping is going to be to the includes folder. Okay, so yes, we want to create that. It has now done the work of adding our vendor folder, and this vendor folder is going to contain all of the code that is downloaded as a composer package. It's also created this autoload PHP file, which is going to go through the process of including our other files for us automatically. And then again, if you need to, you can come back through here and edit this file or change this up or do things like that. Now I want to check and see if this is a working plugin. So let's jump back over here to local, and I have this one-click admin on, and it's going to that user account that I selected, WP admin, and let's check if we have any errors when we activate. Elementor Pro Post Not Found plugin requires Elementor Pro to be installed and activated. Okay, that's awesome. That's important for us to know. So let's go through the process. I'm going to just do this really quick. Awesome. All right, so we're back here. I've got Elementor and Elementor Pro now installed. Let's go ahead and click this one more time and see if anything blows up or if it works. Oh no, we've found an error. Now this comes up quite a bit in programming and WordPress development. There's going to be some kind of an error, and we want to have this happen locally so that when there is an error, then nobody else sees it except for us. Right here it says there's a critical error on this website. Please check your site admin inbox for instructions. Well, we're not actually going to do that. You can look through this and see if that helps you at all, but I want to show you something that's even more powerful that we're going to be using. So let's jump back over to our local, and what we're going to do is we're going to slide this xdebug on. And once that's on, then that allows us to get more detailed information about what's happening in our website and where the error happened and what didn't get set up correctly and things like that. Now, the second piece that's important is over here under Tools, jump over to your Xdebug and VS Code. Now, where do you get this? This actually shows up as an add-on right here. So this is, it comes with the local WP. You can come over here and click on this installed and enabled. That will just say install this as soon as you get here if you haven't installed this. So let's just jump back over to our local sites. We're going to click on Tools and our Xdebug plus VS Code, and you're going to click on this Add Run Configuration to VS Code. So let's go ahead and click on that. And once that's clicked, now let's jump back over to your VS Code. Now what happens is previously under the debug section here, it wasn't showing anything. It'll just say, hey, make a run configuration. Well, we've just installed our run configuration from local WP, which then allows you to select one of these debug sessions. So let's go ahead and start that up. Let's click start. And as you can see here, this is going to allow you to step through your code. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint right here, kind of towards the beginning of our plugin. And then we're going to be able to jump through our code and figure out where the problem is. I have a feeling like it's a problem in our plugin down over here somewhere. So I've put some breakpoints over here so we can get to that. So let's jump back to our page. And what we need to do here is we're just going to refresh the page. And then what happens is that jumps us back to VS Code with this line here and allows us to step through this code. And you can step through it and figure out what's happening. And I'm just going to click this play button because I also have this right here. Whenever Xcode stops our application because of an error or a warning or an exception or a breakpoint, then we're going to have this yellow line here that allows us to step through it. Now let's see what happens if I try and step over this line. Oh, an exception has occurred. And what this is saying is, hey, we couldn't find this particular file. Right? And so if we go and look at our folder structure, this is looking for post not found for Elementor vendor autoload. So let's see, post not found for Elementor, we don't even have a vendor folder. And the reason for that is because we need to tell Composer to look at all of our classes and create a class map so that it can know where the classes are for when we need them. So let's go through and we're going to do Composer, Composer dump auto load. So what that's going to do is that's going to look through our files. And again, we can actually do this with one more command here, a -o. Let's see, -o. And that's going to say, hey, we generated auto load files containing 2 classes. So let's take a look at what that is creating for us. Okay, so that created this auto load file for us. So if we go back to our plugin, that's the file that it was complaining about. Now, I think this is all going to work now nicely. So let's restart our PHP. We're going to come over here and refresh our page. And when we step over that particular file, hey, look, it worked fine. Perfect. So now you've got a little bit of an introduction to debugging your code. If you're running into problems, it's a great place to start. You can also add variables to this watch here. And so you can see what is the actual variable that is being placed in that. And so you can, as you're walking through your code, you can use the watch, the call stack, and the breakpoints to figure out what's happening in your code using VS Code. All right, so now that that's working correctly, let's see if the rest of it loads all right. I'm going to turn off this breakpoint. Okay, would you look at that? Our plugin is installed and activated and running, and it doesn't do anything yet. And the reason it doesn't do anything yet, let's go back to this. The reason it doesn't do anything is because the only thing that our plugin does is when it's initialized, then it runs the init function, and we have commented out the new PNF manager. So I think it's now time for us to reinstantiate our PNF manager. We'll go through that, figure out what that does, and then we'll see that that is now running nicely. So let's uncomment this. And again, I'm using command / to uncomment these things. All right, and I think that's, and we need this right here. All right, so what let's do is let's finish by returning our PNF manager to our plugin so that we can see what is happening inside of it. So the first thing I want to do is go through the process of showing you where I got this information, because nobody codes in a vacuum, right? So over here, these are the Elementor developer controls for how to build plugins that interact with Elementor. So over here is all of the information you need about how to add new controls, how to remove controls. And so what is a control? A control is anything over on the left-hand side that you can create text in or adjust or whatever. All of that happens over there on the left. And so you can create or add or adjust any of that to your liking. Now, the things that I would like to change are actually already existing. So I don't want to actually add a new control. What I really want to do is inject a control into an existing control. And so we can go through the process of reading this page to understand how to insert new controls into existing controls that are already there. This is a great read. I encourage you to take a look at it. All right, so let's get to the meat and potatoes of what this plugin is actually doing. And one of the things I want to point out here is that you can do anything you want inside of this class. This class is now available for you to insert whatever functions or functionality that you see fit. For example, you'll find something on the internet and you'd want to add that to your WordPress website. Now, there's a couple of ways to go about that. One, you could stick that in the themes functions PHP file, and that gets called and run and things like that. But you can also stick that in a plugin like this. If I have something that can be used over and over, right? Or if I have something that is going to be used repeatedly on multiple sites, then I would much rather put that in a plugin, because it's a lot easier for me to have a plugin that's used on multiple sites as opposed to a theme file that is used on one site. So for me, at least this is a rule that I go by. Things that are specific to a particular site stay in the functions PHP file. Anything that's going to be used on more than one site gets put into a plugin, and then I just include that plugin whenever I'm building that site. All right, so let's go back to seeing what is inside this PNF manager that does all of this work. We have here, the first thing that happens is we get constructed. Where do we get constructed? Let's go back here to our plugins.php file. And this happens inside of the init file. So right here, this new PNF manager, then what happens is if it's not defined, so if we don't have Elementor for whatever reason, and usually we do because we already made some of those checks, then we're going to return and we're not going to do anything. But otherwise, we're going to add just 2 actions into Elementor's information. We're going to be going right here, this Elementor element posts section query before section end. And then we're also going to be using the Elementor query results. So we're going to create 2 callbacks. There's one callback and here's the other callback. And so the first one is register controls and the other one is register not found. So let's see what those are. Register controls and register not found. So let's open this one up. When we register our controls, we are past the element that is constructing, let's go back down here, that is constructing the section query. So before the section is ended, then we get an opportunity to add our information into that piece. So we are adding a horizontal rule first, and then we're going to be adding a switcher, and that switcher is labeled, show not found content right there. We have named it Elementor post not found. Now again, let's go back to our documentation because all of this will give us all of the information we need to then go through and finish this out. So again, this is the element that we are receiving, and then we're going to go through and add sections, add different pieces just like this. So that's the documentation. And so basically I just go through and add. Here's a select 2. Here's another select 2. Now, this is an interesting one. This right here, this is a function called get saved data. That function comes from right here. What this does is this checks in the database for a list of all of the sections available for you to use. So this is what actually does some of the heavy lifting to figure out what you can select as a section. And I will leave this as an exercise to go through and understand what's actually happening here. The purpose of this is to figure out what is available for you to select in the dropdown. That's positioned as a select 2 so that you can then select that information. Okay, let's jump out of the register controls and get saved section, and let's go to render not found. So there's 2 different places here that we've created actions. We've added actions. The first is we're going to create the menu on the left-hand side of our builder. The second piece is what happens when we have that rendered. What does that look like? This is what is actually rendered. And so we're basically just saying, hey, if there's no posts, right? So if the total of posts is 0, then we want to go get some information from our widget. So we want to get the settings that were listed in the widget. And if it's not empty, the settings of the enable post not found. And let's take a look at that real quick here. Let's jump up here in our register controls, right? So this one, enable post not found. Enable post not found is equal to yes. And if it's not empty, the type of content, and we can go back up here to the type of content because we actually use that pretty frequently. We've added this control type of content. It's a select 2 with 2 different options. One of them is a save section and one of them is simple text. So we check to make sure that our slider is toggled on and that we have one of these is set. Then we're going to check to see, is this a saved section? If this is a saved section, then we want to figure out which section it is. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create some content which then generates that HTML to build that piece. Then we are going to inject that into our content. If the settings type of content is simple text, then we basically just output that particular piece of text. Let's back out, get a little bit of a higher 30,000 foot view. We're adding this action which registers some new controls. When the query results is posted, then we're rendering the render not found information into that space. And that is really all there is to it. All right, so we're gonna go over here and we're going to create a new section. So we want this to be a section and post not found section. Awesome. So now we can use all of these different things. You can do any kind of page you want, whatever it is, sky's the limit. Sure, let's do this one right here. Let's just insert that one. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, so we have here 404 full width. You can, like I said, you can do whatever you want with this. This could be boxed, it could be full width, whatever. I'm just gonna go with full width for the sake of ease. We're gonna click publish. Now, let's exit this, and we're gonna exit this. Let's see, we're gonna go back to our pages. We're gonna scroll down to query, save section, save section. Now this now shows up, post not found. Okay, awesome. So right now we have a post that's listed, so our post not found content is not gonna show up, but we can easily move this. So custom, we want before today. How's that? Boom, our stuff shows up. With that last line of code into our plugin, that's really all of the code that actually needs to be there for the code to actually run and function. The next few pieces really are nice to haves. If you are wanting to distribute your plugin, there's a couple of pieces that are important. So let's take a look at those just really quick. The README is important because it shows people the different versions and some information on the WordPress repository. A lot of this needs to be there. And so you can check out some of the information in the developer docs for this. Other than that, we're going to make sure that we have our git ignore file so that as we are committing changes to the repository that we don't track things that we don't want to have tracked. We also want to, I'm going to bring back this license here. Like we talked about a little bit earlier, the license is the GPL version 2 license. And so you can actually just grab this verbatim and put this in here, and that will be your license document. This is the GitHub page markdown README. So for those that want to go through the process of having this in a Git repository, this is basically making the Git README look much better. You can see all of that information there. With all those loose ends wrapped up, that's really all I have for this video. If this video has been really helpful for you, consider leaving a like or subscribing. If you have questions or comments about something that I did or something that I should have done, leave those in the comment section down below. I read a lot of the comments, I read most of the comments, and I reply to as many as I can. So, leave me a comment, share with me some of the things that are working for you or not working for you in building your own plugins. I'd love to know some of your questions. And with that, I'm going to bid you a good night.